Okay, so we are in the middle of, I believe, chapters 27 in Alabama Moon. So this is how I'm actually going to be doing my read aloud today. So just follow along. I told Kit to take off his shoes so we could walk quieter. We slipped through the forest until I heard Sanders moan. I looked back at Kit and raised my hand so he would hold still while I moved closer. He nodded and I turned in my feet so that I stood on only the outside edges of them. After getting my bearings, I began to lift and place them slowly into the leaves, watching where each foot went. I ducked under the branches and twisted around bushes like someone in slow motion. When I traveled about 50 yards, I saw movement ahead of me. I stepped sideways to put a large tree between myself and whatever it was. I looked back to check on Kit, but I couldn't see him through the brush. Sanders moaned again, and I felt my neck hairs rise. I reached the tree and peered around it. Sanders was lying on his back next to Deer Creek. His eyes were closed, and his stomach heaved up and down. His clothes were torn and muddy and grass-stained from where he'd been sliding and rolling down hills. He was covered with scrapes, and a t-shirt that he had been using to clean them with besides him, stained with blood. He still had his gun on his belt, and the pistol was snapped into the holster. I stayed behind the tree for a few minutes, listening to him breathe and trying to figure out how to get the pistol. Once again, I imagined snares and pits and ropes and swings and giant crashing logs. It wasn't long before I had the perfect plan in my head. I turned around carefully and slowly made my way back down. Kit and I returned to the top of the ridge about 200 yards down the valley. When they made our way to the creek again, where it ran swift between steep banks, I found 2 long pieces of wisteria vine and worked them for a while before Kit spoke. "What are you going to do?" he asked. "Snare him." "How?" I pointed a large log lying a few feet away. "Roll that over here," I told him. Kit got behind the log and began pushing it towards me. I made a lasso out of one of the vines and placed it in the deer trail that ran the edge of the creek. I tied the other end of the lasso to one end of the log. Finally, I took the other vine and tied it to the log as well. The 2 of us got under the log, and with all our strength, we stood it up against a tree near the creek edge, with the end I had tied the vines to in the air. I pointed to some bushes a few yards off the trail. "You get in those bushes," I told Kit. "When Sanders trips on the lasso loop, you jerk hard on the other vine." Kit stared at me blankly. "It'll work," I reassured him. "Just pull hard." I grabbed the end of the pull vine and put it in his hand. "I'm going to get him. I'll be back in a minute." Kit groaned and tightened his hands. Sanders was still sound asleep. I picked up a stick and poked him in the stomach. He didn't wake, but his hand came up and slapped at his side. I poked him hard. This time, his eyes open, he stared at the treetops. "Sanders," I said. "Huh?" "It's Moon." Suddenly his eyes flashed in my direction. His face shot flame red and veins stood like tent ropes under his skin. "Ah!" he yelled. He rolled over and began to run towards me, and his knees and his hands out in front. I turned and ran down the deer trail. "Boy, you better stop right there. You're a dead kid." I slowed after about 100 yards and zigzagged and ducked easily along the deer trail. I heard Sanders crashing through the forest like a wild hog, and I imagined stickers tearing into him. I jogged past Kit and looked at his wide eyes in the brush. "Get ready," I said. "Here he comes." When Kit pulled the vine, I was crouched down the trail where I could see everything, but not so far that I couldn't stand and lead Sanders away from Kit if things went wrong. Sanders tripped over the raised lasso and fell heavily into the leaves, just as I had planned. The giant log slipped off the tree and went crashing into the Deer Creek below. Jerking the lasso tight around Sanders' ankles, his legs were yanked so hard that he spun around like a compass needle. He tore chunks of bushes and grass from the ground as the log pulled him towards the creek bank. Finally, he managed to grab a small clump of bushes that held, and he rolled over onto his stomach. The log bobbed and swayed in the creek, ready to pull him with it if he could let go. I came running back up the trail until I was standing over him. He glanced at me briefly, then looked at his hands holding the bush. "I whipped you good this time," I said. All he did was yell. I bent over and unsnapped his holster. I took the pistol out and jabbed it in my pocket. "I'd be fine if you hadn't taken my things," I said. "Kill you," he gasped. I stared at him. Suddenly I felt myself getting angry again. "I'll kill you," I screamed. You took me to Pinson. Leave me alone." "Moon," Kit yelled. I stood there, breathing heavily. Mooney yelled again. I looked over at him. Come on, he begged. Chapter 28.